Okay, so we just finished talking about the epidermis, so let's talk about dermis next. And so that's going to be true skin. It's this layer underneath epidermis. So you have your epidermis here, and the layer underneath is dermis. So it's underneath the stratum basale, to be specific. And so under stratum basale, this is the layer that's called dermis. And it has all these blood vessels, which basically means there are no dead skin cells, and it's going to have glands in place. So it also has some connective tissue present, and also going to have a muscle, and that's called the erector pili muscle. And it's going to be, the muscle is going to be connected to the hair follicle. We're going to have hair follicles, blood vessels, a smooth muscle, which is called erector pili muscle. So the glands are going to kind of squeeze oils with or the sweat out. And then this is where you have all your nerves as well, your sensory structures. And that's what exists in the dermis. These are called accessory structures, and that are going to exist in the dermis. And then underneath the dermis, you have hypodermis. So neural sensory detection and also regulus blood flow, so all the nerve endings. Okay, so dermis is what true skin is, and it's divided into two subsections. And the first layer of these is kind of wavy. It's kind of wavy like that. And it looks like papilla, called dermal papilla. And papilla refers to kind of like bumps. But you got these wavy line over here, and it's connecting to the dermis, connecting the region of the epidermis to the dermis, where you all have these wavy lines underneath. So that's called papillary region. Superficial consists of areolar connective tissue. And then we have also the reticular layer. So the reticular layer is where it's going to be, a little bit deep. So deeper, it consists of dense irregular connective tissue and adipose tissue. And this is where you have the lines a little bit straighter. They're not as wavy as the layer above. And this region under the papillary layer is going to be called the reticular layer, as I mentioned before. So this is where you're going to find the irregular connective tissue. If you go look for dense irregular connective tissue, this is one of the really easy places to find it. By just grabbing the slide of skin, then you're going to go ahead and go into the reticular layer, and this is where you will have dense irregular connective tissue, which is the same thing as the covering around the muscles and covering around the organs. So the function of papillary layer is to be teeth. So this is the dermal papilla, and it looks kind of bumpy, and it acts like teeth, kind of gives you more grip. And that's what's happening over here. The epidermis is grabbing the layer of dermis, and that's what kind of keeps it there, kind of grabs on and stays there because of this bumpy stuff. This is what it looks like under the scanning microscope, electron microscope, and we don't have access to these, so you're not required to memorize what they look like under the electron microscope. And these colors are false again because the electron microscope requires electrons and computers to generate the image, and the colors are kind of just added on to make them look pretty. The layer underneath is hypodermis, below the skin, below true skin. So this part here is hypodermis, also known as superficial fascia. It's the subcutaneous layer, the subcu layer, and depending on where you are looking at this in the body, hypodermis could be muscle or bone or areola. connective tissue and technically is not considered to be skin. The hypodermis is what skin is connected to. So under the hypodermis, depending on where you are, you'll see lots of adipose tissue. So those are fat cells. And hopefully you can find them, on the slide in the lab and look at them in the lab. And there are also going to be some dense regular tissue and your blood vessels. If you zoom in, you have some blood vessels there, arteries and veins. And then you might be able to see some muscle because they're gonna have some maybe um, hair follicles. So it's connected integument and underlying muscle or bone. So how is it bundled together? So what happens here is basically, so this is what it looks like, and this is a microscopic slide. This is what it looks like there. So we're going a little bit quickly here in the lecture, but feel free, since it's recorded online, feel free to maybe pause it and write notes and reverse it if needed. So let's see how it's organized. So you got these the epidermis, and then you have the dermal papillae here, and it kind of holds on, the epidermis kind of holds on to that, and then you have your dermal there, and then underneath you have your hypodermis. And you see these circles in the hypodermis? That's adipose. So you have a lot of adipose tissue there. So it contains adipose tissue, loose connective tissue with adipose cells, subcutaneous fat. So how is it, so what happens now? You have the, the tissues or the skin. How is it bundled? So there are fibers that are made up of collagen. So bundles of collagen and elastic fibers arranged in parallel. So these are called lines of cleavage. It's like you're looking at electrical wires and, the covering around the electrical wires. That's what keeps it nice and organized. So the bundle of collagen is what, creates these lines that you see over here on this picture. So the word cleavage means to split things up. So let's see. So if you had maybe egg cell and or maybe a sperm cell and an egg cell, and they combine and then they go through the process of fertilization, and then the zygote starts to split. That's called, that means it's, cleaving, called cleaving. So maybe this one cell becomes into two cells. That's cleavage or cleaving. So that cleavage means to split. So these lines of cleavage are going to split one bundle of collagen from another bundle. So they're going to go into different directions, depending on what part of the body you're in. What this has to do is with the significance of surgery. So what I mean by that is if a surgeon has if they have a planned surgery where they have plenty of time to plan it, it's not like an emergency surgery, then they cut into the skin. But if they cut into the skin wrong, it's not going to heal properly. So if you know the direction of these lines of cleavage, then you know how to cut into them. So what you want to do is you want to cut parallel to it. So let's say you have these lines of cleavage that are going parallel. And then you want to make a cut. And this is how you make the cut, parallel. And then you want to maybe stitch it up. So you stitch it up. So that's going to heal properly. So pretend that's a stitch, the little black lines there. It just heals fine, and that's going to be, that's the way, one should do it. But if there's a surgeon who doesn't know what they're doing, or maybe if they're in an emergency situation, and there are, let's see. I'm trying to change the color here, so give me a second. So let's see. These are lines of cleavage again. and there's a surgeon, maybe they're doing emergency surgery or they don't know what they're doing, either or, and they make a cut this way. And then they stitch it up. So these are the stitches. They stitch it up. And what's going to happen is, because of these collagen fibers, they're very elastic, they're going to pull in that direction. So they start pulling on the cut or the stitches, and then you stitch it up, hope that it remains closed, but that's not what's really happening. There's collagen fibers, because they're elastic, they're going to pull in that direction, and they're going to pull in a direction. As a consequence of this, it's going to pull on the wound a bit, and maybe it's going to open up, and then it's going to be all, if it doesn't open up, maybe it'll be all red, and then if it opens up, it gets exposed to the air and so forth, and maybe you end up with a nasty scar because the surgeon cut perpendicular to the cleavage lines. So this has a surgical significance. A cut parallel to the lines remains closed, and then a cut perpendicular or across the lines, gaps open, and more scarring happens as a result of that. So the reason your primary doctor, sends you to a dermatologist or a plastic surgeon if you need to have any type of stitches, especially on your face, is because a regular primary care doctor is not going to risk, giving you a really big scar. But if it's something, in a place where it's hidden, they might, go ahead and stitch you up. But if it's in a delicate place, especially for children, they're going to send them to a surgeon, plastic surgeon or dermatologist, because they need to work with these lines of cleavage to make sure that the cut doesn't remain open and there's no scarring happening, especially on the face. And it also looks like, something that you find at an acupuncture place. So you got this big map of human body, and you got places where you click on the needles and underneath. So you also have, neurons that are going to have these paths, where the muscles have these paths. So all kinds of invisible things and happening in your skin or under your skin. So you're not even aware, but potentially people have learned about it long time ago. And that's where Eastern medicine comes in, and it might explain how acupuncture works. So you might see a poster like this if you go to acupuncture place. Okay, so we have talked about the layers and how they are bundled. Let's talk about accessory structure. So this word accessory means additional things. If you buy yourself an iPhone, what accessories are you getting with the iPhone? So it means what other things you're getting with the iPhone. So what other things are found in the skin other than the layers are these cells. So you got hair follicles, exocrine glands, and then nails. So this little block here shows you where they're located. You got yourself a, hair follicle. That's going to be this guy that's growing out. And so this is the living part of the hair, and this is the non-living part of the hair. And it's going to be making maybe oil. So there are sebaceous glands that are connected to the hair. Sometimes, people wash their hair and their hair get really oily, and that's because there's sebaceous glands that are connected to hair. So there are all these kinds of sensory structures as part of your nervous system, and sensory structures that help you feel the world around you. And we mentioned this before. You have this erector pili muscle. That's the erector pili muscle that makes the hair stand up. So I believe it's Greek for spear. So the word pili means spear, and erector means like erection, making it stand up straight. So imagine that you got these spears, and they're standing straight. So this is how ancient Greeks and ancient Romans used to fight. They would have the columns of shoulders and spears, and the ones in the back will have spears standing straight up, and that would protect them from arrows. So that's the erector pili muscle. So let's talk about, so we have hair follicles, glands, sensory structures, and erector pili muscle. So let's talk about some of these in a little bit more detail. For example, here you have nerve endings. The first ones are called tactile discs. These are light touch receptors, and they're also known as Merkel discs. Merkel, M-E-R-K-E-L. So I'm going to basically use these two terms interchangeably. So you have to, make sure you know both of these. And then you have these stretch receptors, known as Ruffini corpuscles. And what they have done is they have gotten rid of a lot of proper names. So they're just using kind of PC names. So a tactile disc is going to be called a Merkel disc. And Ruffini corpuscles, that's the stretch receptor. And then we have one called laminated corpuscle. And because it has layers, we've got a layer that's called laminar layer, and that's the laminar corpuscle. And it's also another name for it is the Pacini corpuscle. So let me write that for you. Pacinian, actually, Pacinian corpuscle. And then some textbooks they use Ruffini corpuscles, or they call them Pacinian corpuscles. So you need to know both. So you need to know, all of these. If you don't know some of these and then they're using them interchangeably, then you're gonna have a hard time. And so there are these free nerve endings that's always, there. They are functioning as either, Merkel discs or tactile discs. And then you have the corpuscles. Corpuscles mean they're kind of like a lollipop. They're into this round structure, so like this. It's a corpuscle. And these are the discs or cells. One example I can think of is when you go to the doctor, they hit your knee with a hammer, and with the hammer, they're stimulating your stretch receptor that causes a reflex to cause your foot to kick up. And laminar corpuscle or Pacinian corpuscle, their job is for deep pressure or vibration. So so basically what I mean by that is if your neighbor is playing some music and it's bass that's booming between the walls and it's going to be deep pressure, you can feel that music. So even blind people, they can kind of feel that. So those are some of the accessory structure examples. Okay, so next thing is going to be hair. So we have less hair than our ancestors. Our ancestors evolved hair primarily to keep warm and protect ourselves. Then we kind of changed and split off, turning into other species, and we started to lose hair. That was the initial purpose of hair. Then after that, might have evolved into other things like communication or for sexual selection and things of that sort. But for the most part, the hair were there for protection and sensory detection. If you look at cats' whiskers are kind of, help them feel the world around them, kind of give them a heads up if danger were coming up or danger was there. So if you were cold, what happens is that you get goosebumps. And the reason why you get goosebumps is because you got this muscle called the rector pili muscle. I mentioned before. This muscle pulls on your hair, making it, it stand up. So why you want to do that? Well, you have all this fur. Let's talk about a cat. So if they have all this fur that are flapped up, standing up, then trapping the air, um, then the warm air will keep you warm. So if you were fighting, you want to go ahead and make your hair stand up because if you're fluffed up, it'll make you look bigger and the opponent might think you're bigger than you actually are and they might say, oh, I don't want to fight you. So that's going to be the function of erector pili muscle. It's responsible for goosebumps, making the hair stand up, and then hair also function as to provide protection and sensory detection. And when rector pili muscle pulls on the hair, it gives you goosebumps. This is what it looks like under the microscope. So if you go ahead and see, there's a hair bulb here. That's a hair bulb. And if you take your scalpel, so let's say, I'm gonna try to draw one for you. So this is a hair bulb. And if you take your scalpel and you cut through this hair, you are going to get a cross section of it like that. So this is what it is. This is a cross section of hair. So it'll be a cross section, and then you have the hair shaft in the middle like that. And if you cut the hair, notice I did it diagonally here, and that's going to be kind of oval shape. That's why you have this oval shape here. Depends on kind of how you cut the hair. So let's see what's next. So this is showing you different layers of hair. We're not gonna ask you about that. It's just a little bit too much, so don't worry about that, about the layers of hair. But know what's on bottom. On the bottom here is going to be the roots of the hair, and then this part is going to be called hair shaft, and then on top you have the part with the keratin. So this hair shaft is, so this is called hair shaft. This is not alive. So the root part is alive, but this is not alive. So if you um have a secretion that's basically gets recorded in your, or excretion in your hair. We were talking about the drug test earlier about that. So this bulb is living, and then the hair root, and it's going to secrete this chemical, which is protein, and that makes the hair shaft, and that's keratin. So the living part is only going to be down here, and if you want to do the CSI stuff, want to get DNA from a suspect, you have to have a hair bulb, if it's a hair sample. So you cut the hair. If you just cut the hair, you don't have the hair bulb, then there's no DNA. To get a DNA sample, you need to have the hair bulb. So that the reason is because hair bulb has the living cells in it. The hair shaft or the top part of the hair doesn't have that. So next we're gonna continue in a different video. So that'll be last part of this lecture, and we'll go through the hair growth cycle. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and finish with the hair growth cycle, and in the next video we'll pick up the glands. So last thing I want to say about the hair is that it grows in a cycle, and what happens is you have an active phase that's going to grow from 2 to 5 years, and then after that it's gonna go in regression, something called regression, and then hair falls out, and then you have this kind of dormant phase after that. That's a resting phase or dormant phase, and then you have the reactivation, and then hair grows back again. So this is the reason why different people may or may not be able to grow long hair. You might be, one of those people who always have short length hair, and that's because the growth phase is only 2 years. Your growth phase for the hair is only 2 years, and by the time you get to the shoulder length, it kind of gets all, kind of dry and has dead ends and everything, and it just seems like it can't grow any longer. And then on the other hand, some people can grow their hair long because their cycle is 5 years. So they're, um, there are people who have really long hair and their names in Guinness Book of World Records. And there are people who never cut their hair and their hair can be 20 feet long. That just shows that there's lots of different kinds of, there's lots of diversity between our genetics, and that some people can do it, and then some people just can't seem to grow their hair more than shoulder length. So the question is, why aren't you bald every 2 years? So the reason is that every 2 years or every 5 years, depending on how long the cycle is for your hair growth. The reason is because not all hair falls at the same time. Only one or two or a couple of hair fall out when you wash your hair or when you do your hair. And you only find few hairs that come out. And if you do this and you stagger it, where a couple of hair are coming out every now and then you're always going to be losing a couple of hairs each day when you wash your hair, and then it's not going to happen all at the same time. The other thing that can happen is the stress can cause your hair to come out in clumps. If your hair is falling on out in big clumps, it means you're being stressed out. And somehow one of the biggest stresses is pregnancy. Women who go through natural childbirth afterwards, they tend to have their hair fall out. So it doesn't have anything to do with the pregnancy itself. It's the fact that labor was so traumatic, so intense, and so stressful that it actually caused the hair to fall out. So that's going to be the last thing I want to say about hair. And then we'll pick up on the glands in the next video.